Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we're going to be taking a look at something pretty interesting that happened over on Twitter. As you guys are probably well aware of, in the last few years there's been a pretty big effort to change language and things like that to be more like gender neutral and less offensive to groups of people. And it's been a pretty massive thing kind of going on, right? Over the last, I don't know, half decade or so, it's definitely ramped up a lot, and people are actually kind of looking towards language as something that can be used to oppress people and be hateful towards people, even when it's not necessarily intended to do so. And in some instances, obviously this does make sense. There are some things that probably could be outdated in our society that should be changed, but one of the things that it's been focused in on very heavily has been usage of the terms like Latino, Latina, Hispanic, things like that to refer to people from like Latin America and Spain and Mexico and all these other places. And if you didn't know, the way that this has been supposedly fixed by people on the left, primarily Democrats here in the United States, is instead of calling people Latino, Latina, things like that, they've been saying Latinx. Latinx. Apparently this is supposed to get rid of the gender favoritism in this language. If you didn't know, Spanish is a gendered language, meaning that, you know, I don't know how to describe this the best, the words where it's meant or could be used to describe like the gender of people, for instance, like niño and niña, that's how they do it. O usually is more masculine, A is usually for more feminine, you know, references and things like that. That's part of the Spanish language. A lot of languages are gendered like this. And this is how, you know, Spanish has existed for a long time, but apparently it's offensive to use terms like this because it's gendered terms and, you know, everybody now just is offended by something, right? Everyone has to find something to complain about. Apparently there's people out there, if you call them Latino or Latina, like it's so fucking offensive to them. I'm not sure, but it's once again, seems like only really appeared over the last few years. I had never really heard anything like this, and Latinx is actually being considered an offensive term, and for the most part, it just isn't sticking. And this was proven by a new poll that just recently came out that I want to talk about, but beforehand, I want to go ahead and refer, I guess, my real-world example, my real-world case for this whole thing here. One of my best friends is Hispanic, he's of Mexican descent, and, well, a few months ago, I just straight up asked him, I was like, hey, what do you think of being called Latinx, right? What do you think about that? And his word-for-word response to me was, what the fuck does that even mean? So, yeah, I just wanted to see what he thought about it, and apparently, it's just not something that's sticking, and this seems to be something that has happened also with a lot of my followers that have kind of given their opinion on this, people of Hispanic heritage and stuff who watch my videos, oftentimes like on Twitter, when I bring this kind of thing up, based on the topic. They'll say that they don't fucking see why this is supposed to resonate with them, and they don't find any use for Latinx as a term, right? Because being called Latino or Latina or Hispanic or whatever already does it for them, right? Like they already feel like they're being represented just fine with that word. So this has been kind of like a failed movement by SJWs and people on the left, and it's kind of funny to watch it fall flat and just completely, you know, fall apart, because it's one of those things that like they were so sure of, right? Like all these people who wanted to make these changes, right? They were so sure this was going to work, that this was going to be what the Democrats needed to get more votes and stuff like that, and it just isn't working. So as Democrats seek to reach out to Latino voters in a more gender-neutral way, they've increasingly begun using the word Latinx, a term that first began to get traction among academics and activists on the left. But that very effort could be counterproductive in courting those of Latin American descent, according to a new nationwide poll of Hispanic voters. Only 2% of those polled refer to themselves as Latinx, while 68% called themselves Hispanic and 21% favored Latino or Latina. According to the survey from Bendixson and Amandi International, a top Democratic firm specializing in Latino outreach. More problematic for Democrats, 40% said that Latinx bothers or offends them to some degree, and 30% said they would be less likely to support a politician or organization that uses the term. Okay, so let's break these numbers down, right? So in their effort to be, you know, more sensitive to how Hispanic people might feel about being called Latino or Latina, they have pretty much forcefully tried to change the language. They've tried to forcefully push this whole Latinx thing in and deem that that is the acceptable thing to say to people and deem that to be like the politically correct way to talk. Meanwhile, doing that, making the language less offensive, they have somehow managed to offend nearly half of all Latino/Hispanic people who were polled about this whole thing. So I don't understand how they can even justify something failing this bad. I mean, it literally is the opposite result of what you want. I mean, you try your best, right, to basically kind of cater to these people and treat them as if, like, the way you feel about their language is the way that they should feel about their language. And then in doing that, instead of bringing people together and getting them to vote for you, you've made them, in fact, demand that you don't use that kind of language, basically, if you want Hispanic voters to vote for you. And obviously, the Democrats really need the Hispanic vote to help them win. The Hispanic section of the American population has been exploding. And Hispanic voters are increasingly gaining power, at least voting power, in the United States because, the population's growing. A lot of them are actually also, if you didn't know, Hispanic people are often leaning right now and are aligning themselves more with Republican candidates. And it's actually going to talk about this up next in the article, and I want to talk about that a little bit too. So, at a time when Republicans appear to be making inroads among Latino voters, the survey results raise questions about how effectively the party is communicating with them, according to the pollster, Fernando Amani, and other Democrats and Latino vote experts. Quote, the numbers suggest that using Latinx is a violation of the political Hippocratic Oath, which is to first do no electoral harm, said Amandi, whose firm advised Barack Obama's successful Hispanic outreach nationwide in his 2 presidential campaigns. Why are we using a word that is preferred by only 2% but offends as many as 40% of those voters we want to win? Amandi emphasized that he wasn't blaming the erosion of Latino support for Democrats merely on the use of the word Latinx. Hispanic voters have started shifting right for myriad reasons, he said, chiefly because of more aggressive engagement from Republicans who have, quote, weaponized culture war issues at the margins with Hispanic voters. But as some on the left began embracing the term Latinx in politics, it started to expose a fault line in the party between moderate traditionalists and the more active progressive base. Those embracing Latinx have emphasized or explained that the word, and the trend of making Spanish words gender inclusive by ending them in an X, is not a product of the US left or white elites, but instead can be traced back to Latin America and Latinos. It's also an alternative to Hispanic, a term also criticized for its ties to Spain, which colonized much of Latin America. Okay, so I see a little bit of faulting in the logic here, okay? So the article first insinuates that Republicans have been getting these inroads with Hispanic voters. And this is true. I mean, we've seen multiple instances in the last few elections, right, where, the Hispanic vote actually kind of surprised people with how far that they leaned right. I mean, a lot of Hispanic voter bases were very in favor of Donald Trump, even after the years of talking about building the wall against Mexico and all of the issues that kind of arose with his comments and his, I guess, political actions that were supposed to target Hispanic countries. So, even though the Republicans are oftentimes criticized for their handling of like how they treat Hispanic people in particular, somehow they're getting them to vote for them. And I think that this article really highlights a big issue with that. So it says that they are leaning right more, but then is also saying that apparently people from Latin American countries and whatnot are responsible for the term Latinx trying to be popularized and making, Spanish a more gender-inclusive language and whatnot. So my thing is, number one, if that was the case and Hispanic people were really behind this push to get Latinx to be a thing, number one, why would they be voting for Republicans more often when they're not the ones using that language? And number two, also, if they are the ones who are creating this and they're trying to popularize this, how come only 2% of Hispanic voters even actually want to be called this? Usually you would think, right, like if people from Latin America were the ones trying to popularize this change, that it would result in Hispanic voters pretty much around the world starting to have a little bit more support for it because it's actually a change that they have made for their own language. It's a change that they decided upon. But I really don't think that that's the case, and I do think that this is a change made by white elites, and here's why. When you see the people who get offended over shit like this, being called, using terms like Latino and Latina, talking about gendered language and how it needs to be erased and shit, name who you really have come to mind when that happens, right? Most people are thinking of a fucking rainbow-haired feminist, right, on a college campus. That's who most people are imagining are getting upset about some shit like this. Because that's the, demographic that really has been pushing this kind of fucking change. Once again, Hispanic voters don't like it, Hispanic people don't like it, my Hispanic friend that I've talked to about it doesn't even fucking recognize it. But according to this, they're trying to say that Hispanic people are the ones pushing this. I don't believe that. And when you look at the Democrats too, who runs the Democrat Party? I mean, let's be real, it's not minorities. Minorities don't run the Democrat Party. 85% of all of the elected Democrats are fucking white men, okay? Or white women, and they're always older white men and women. The Democrats, you know, they love to, and this is my problem with the Democrats. I do agree on some of the things that they want to do, right? Just as I do with the Republican Party, but the problem with the Democrats, and the reason why I really can't get on board with them a lot of the time, is the party is actually two completely different parties. There's, you know, like the moderate Democrats, which a lot of the time I feel like I identify a little bit more with when it comes to the policies and the changes that they want to make. And then you have these people who are all the way fucking left, all the way past the Democrat Party, and they're pushing completely different things than what traditional Democrats want. And the Democrat Party is split between these two different groups of people fucking yelling at each other all the time, right? You got Democrats, you know, who are just focused on passing an infrastructure bill, or who are just interested in solving the fucking healthcare issue in this country, or cutting military spending to focus on social programs. Then you have Democrats who their only genuine concern is fucking policing language, policing politics, policing entertainment, telling people what they can and can't say, what they can and can't find funny. And this is a perfect example because these people are the silent but loud minority in the Democrat Party. And they just fucking ruin a lot of the work that the other Democrats actually try to put in to make their party relevant and actually try to put in to make their party do something. And this is the problem with the political parties in the US. They're so fucking out of touch with what everybody actually wants in this country. The vast majority of Americans could give a fuck less about, you know, Latinx, Latino, Latina, Hispanic. That debate does not matter. People are trying to pay their bills. People are trying to focus on all these real world fucking issues going on right now. And this is honestly the #1 issue to so many people, and it's so fucking stupid. It's a change that legitimately offends a group of minorities in this country that's being pushed so hard by the Democrats. And even when they're fucking wrong, even when all of the information that's coming out is telling them that Hispanic people don't like this, their first instinct is to say, oh, well, it's not even us who's coming up with it. It's actually the people who are mad about it. They're the ones who are coming up with this fucking change. You know, it's not the 21-year-old privileged white girl who got college all the way paid for by her fucking parents, but is telling everybody else what they can and can't say and think. In my personal perspective of life, the people who do the shit like this, who like try to police language like this and make these kinds of changes that people don't like, always grew up spoiled. I mean, this isn't to say all across the board, but feel free to share your fucking experiences. The people who are really pushing these kinds of changes, #1, they are for the most part white, okay? And I would say that they're elites. If your family can afford to send you to a high prestigious institution or university in this country, and you don't have to worry about it being paid or college debt or anything, I would consider you a fucking elite, okay? And so those are the people who, in my personal perspective, have been the ones pushing this kind of shit. And it turns out that, hey, guess what? Not everybody fucking agrees with them, and they just can't handle that, right? Who would have guessed that taking a language that has existed perfectly fine for all this time, right? That has been completely okay, nobody's had a problem with anything, a non-offensive term, who could have guessed that changing that to a generally more offensive and culturally disrespectful term would actually be bad, right? It blows my mind the lack of self-awareness that these kinds of people have, man, and it honestly kind of pisses me off because it makes me feel bad because I honestly can't imagine like being Hispanic. Obviously, I'm white, right? I cannot imagine being Hispanic and being genuinely offended by someone calling me fucking Latinx, and then when I express that, they say, oh, well, it's not us deciding that this needs to be said. In reality, it's actually you Hispanics that are wanting this to be done. If there's anything to get from this video, it's that when a group of minorities especially tell you that they don't fucking like the policing of their language that you're portraying down onto them, maybe you stop doing that, and maybe you stop blaming everybody else for it not going well. If you're Hispanic or Latino or Latina, whatever you prefer, and you're watching this video, go ahead and tell me what you think down below. I would love to hear what you have to say, because for the most part, when I've heard from people in this community talk about this, they don't fucking appreciate it. So let me know what you think down below, and thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel, follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubToOptimus. Make sure to check out Shop Opti down below, and until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, not saying Latinx, and signing out.